Statements by ministers. Before we begin, following discussion among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand that there is an agreement to observe a moment of silence for the victims of the attack in London, Ontario. J'invite les honorables députés de se lever.
I now invite honourable members to rise.
Statements by ministers. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Assalamu alaikum. Lately, a lot of Canadians have been enjoying evening walks to get a bit of fresh air after long days at home during this pandemic. On Sunday in London, Ontario, that's what a grandmother, 2 parents, and 2 children went out to do. 3 generations of the Afzoul family. Salman, Madia, their children Yumna and Fayaz, and their grandmother. But unlike every other night, that family never made it home. Their lives were taken in a brutal, cowardly, and brazen act of violence. This killing was no accident. This was a terrorist attack motivated by hatred in the heart of one of our communities. Monsieur le Président, je suis horrifié par l'attaque qui a enlevé la vie à 4 membres d'une famille et blessé gravement un petit garçon de 9 ans dimanche soir à London, en Ontario. Nous sommes de tout cœur avec leurs proches durant ces moments extrêmement difficiles. Et on espère tous que le petit garçon pourra se remettre de ses blessures rapidement, même si on sait qu'il vivra longtemps avec la tristesse, l'incompréhension et la colère causées par cette attaque lâche et islamophobe. Ce n'est malheureusement pas un cas isolé. La grande mosquée de Québec, the cowardly murder of Mohammed Aslam Zafis at a mosque in Toronto, the violent attacks against Black Muslim women in Edmonton, and so many other people across the country who faced insults, threats, and violence. They were all targeted because of their Muslim faith. This is happening here in Canada, and it has to stop. Monsieur le Président, on ne doit pas s'habituer à cette violence.
We must not become
On ne doit pas
desensitized
se
to this
laisser
violence.
désensibiliser. On ne peut pas accepter
We must
que ça
not
devienne normal.
accept this as normal.
Chaque fois qu'on est témoin de cette haine,
Every
on doit
time that we
la
witness such
dénoncer.
hate, we must call
Ça
it out.
commence par des petits gestes.
This starts with small
Words
actions.
matter. They can be a seed that grows into an ugly, pervasive trend, and sometimes they lead to real violence. The jokes that are not funny, the casual racism, the insinuations that are only meant to diminish, the toxic rhetoric, the disinformation and the extremism online, the polarization we see too often in our public discourse and in our politics. As leaders and as Canadians, we not only have to say enough is enough, we must take action. We cannot allow any form of hate to take root, because the consequences can be far too serious. We've seen it in Christchurch. We've seen it in other places around the world, and we've lived it here at home. Right now, Canadians are outraged by what happened on Sunday, and many Muslim Canadians are scared. Last night, I spoke with the Mayor of London, Ed Holder, and a representative of the local Muslim community, Nawaz Tahir, to share my condolences and discuss the urgency of what more we must do to keep our communities safe. Mr. Speaker, we stand with the people of London and with Muslim communities across the country. We're going to continue to fund initiatives like the Security Infrastructure Program to help protect communities at risk and their schools and places of worship. We'll continue to fight hate online and offline, which includes taking even more action to dismantle far-right hate groups, like we did with the Proud Boys, by adding them to Canada's terror listing. And we'll continue doing everything we can to keep communities safe. L'auteur de l'attaque cruelle de
The
dimanche à
perpetrator
London
of Sunday's
ne nous
cruel
représente
attack in London
en
does
tant que
not
Canadiens,
represent us as
parce
Canadians,
qu'on sait qu'on est plus
because
fort
we
dans la
know
paix
that we gain
que dans la
strength
haine
through peace,
et la violence.
not through hatred and violence.
Et on sait aussi qu'il faut se
But we
dire
also
la
know
vérité.
that we need
Cette
to
haine
look at the
et
truth in the
cette
face.
violence
This hatred
existe
and this
chez nous,
violence does exist in our country,
que ce soit dans la rue,
whether it's in our streets,
en ligne
online,
ou ailleurs.
or elsewhere.
Et tant qu'elle va exister,
And as long as it exists,
on va avoir du
we will
travail à
have
faire.
work to do.
Mr. Speaker, if anyone thinks racism and hatred don't exist in this country, I ask to them this: how do we explain such violence to that child in hospital? How can we look families in the eye and say Islamophobia isn't real? When you listen to the black Muslim woman who constantly looks over her shoulder at the bus stop, fearing someone will pull off her hijab or hurt her, she'll tell you Islamophobia exists. If you listen to the parents who beg their children not to wear traditional clothes for fear of them being harassed or attacked simply for what they're wearing, I'll tell you, racism exists. Muslim families have often felt uncertain or even fearful when they go out in the streets wearing traditional garb. The reality is, most Canadians haven't necessarily been aware of that fear that far too many racialized and Muslim Canadians carry with them anytime they go outside. If the attack in London has any follow-up or I don't even want to say positive, but any impact on non-Muslim Canadians, it should be this: to understand the anxiety and the fear that our fellow Canadians carry, that they shouldn't be. And it is on all of us to understand that experience and be there to support and to help. We can and we must act. As Canadians, we've been fighting a global pandemic for over a year now, and we did it by coming together, by working together. And that is the only way of confronting the ugly face of hatred. I want all Canadians to know that we are all diminished when any one of us is targeted. We need to stand up to reject racism and terror and work together to embrace what makes our country strong, our diversity. May peace and blessings be upon you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in London, Ontario, there's a 9-year-old boy lying in a hospital bed. If he's awake, he may already know that his family will never be the same. Just before 8:40 on a tranquil Sunday evening, as his family went out for a walk together, they were struck down by a brutal act of terror. As a family went for a walk on a Sunday evening on a street in Canada. À l'heure où on se parle, un jeune garçon de 9 ans se
As
trouve
we speak,
à
a
l'hôpital de
9-year-old
London,
boy is lying in
en
a hospital
Ontario.
in London,
Si
Ontario.
elle révélait, il sait déjà
awake,
que sa famille ne
He may
sera
already know that
plus
his
jamais
family
la
will
même.
never be the same.
Dimanche soir, peu avant 20h40, les membres de sa
On Sunday
famille
night,
ont été
around
frappés
8:30 in the evening,
par un
members of his
acte
family
horrible,
were hit by a
alors qu'ils se
terrible act
promenaient
of terror
dans leur quartier.
as they were just out for a walk in their
We
neighborhood.
grieve for his family. We grieve for the Muslim community in London and across the country because this is a pain they have known before. Malgré notre peine et notre
Despite
chagrin,
our pain
nous
and
devons
sorrow,
trouver une
we need to
solution.
find a solution.
Because there's a 9-year-old boy lying in a hospital bed, we have to strive to learn and be better. The Canada of his future needs to be better than the Canada of Sunday evening. He deserves a Canada where his family can go for a walk on a tranquil Sunday evening. He deserves a Canada where he can go to a mosque and not worry about his safety. He deserves a Canada where Muslim women of faith can wear a hijab without fear of being accosted or harassed in public. Il mérite un pays libre
He
et
deserves
sans
a
peur,
free
un
and fearless
pays
country,
où on
a
peut se
country where
promener
it's
en toute
safe to
sécurité.
walk outside.
Over the last year, we've become more separated from one another. Police services have warned of a dramatic increase in hate crime, violent extremism, Islamophobia, and other signs of intolerance from one part of our country to another. It feels like we're having conversations in grief and fighting intolerance more and more. And as hard as that is, it is important for us to shine light collectively to fight against the darkness. It's important that we measure the distance between the Canada that we have and the Canada that we want. But it's more important for us to not just recognize the distance between those Canadas, but to conquer the distance, Mr. Speaker. Quand nous parlons d'une société où chacun
When we
est
talk
libre
about
de
a society
pratiquer sa
where
foi,
everyone is
de
free to
parler
practice their
ouvertement
faith,
et
to
d'aller
speak openly,
où bon lui
and to
semble,
walk where they
il faut
like,
se rappeler que
we
5
need to remember
personnes de
that
London,
5
en
people
Ontario,
in London, Ontario,
ne pouvaient même pas
couldn't
se
even do
promener.
this.
When we talk about a society where everyone is free to worship, to speak, and to go where they please, it's important to remember that there were 5 people in London who couldn't go for a walk. And someone else's hatred of their faith is the only reason why. The Canada we have is one where 4 of these people are never going home. The Canada we want is the one that we owe to that 9-year-old in a hospital bed. The Muslim community in Canada has known a lot of sorrow, and much of it is all too recent. In the hours since learning of this attack, I found myself thinking of my many Muslim friends and their young families, people I've known for decades, children that I've watched grow up. It frustrates and indeed terrifies me that they have to live with the fear that this could have been them on a walk with their children. Children who don't yet know or understand the hatred that far too often lives in this world. Freedom to worship can't exist without freedom from fear, and every Canadian has a right to that. That is a basic promise of this country. It's something that comes from just putting your feet on the ground here. It's felt like a bit of a false promise lately to Muslim Canadians. And a horrible attack like this shows us why. But this country has always said that it can do better, but today we must pledge that it will do better. Tonight, and today, to my Muslim friends and to those grieving across the country, I'm reminded of the universal message contained in chapter 41 of the Quran. Quote, "Good and evil are not equal. Repel evil with good and be patient." End quote. While your faith asks you to be patient in the face of evil and adversity, our first duty as political leaders is to ensure the security of our citizens and to ensure that Canadians can be free to live, work, and pray as they wish. Your patience in the light of this horrific attack will transform our resolve to stand with you and fight against intolerance and evil. Tonight, as the people of London hold a vigil for the family lost to this horrific attack of terror, let us resolve to do more than just grieve. Many Canadians, including one 9-year-old lying in a London hospital bed, need us to do that more than ever. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker,
comment en finir avec la
how
haine?
do we get rid of hate?
Comment en finir avec la violence?
How do we
Comment en
get rid of
finir
violence?
avec la peur de la différence?
How do we get rid
La
of the
tragédie de
fear
London
of
doit nous
other
pousser
or
à
of difference?
réfléchir
The
davantage.
tragedy in London is
peut pas
forcing us
laisser
to
ces
reflect on
événements
these
se
things
produire et se
more.
reproduire
We can't allow
encore
these things to happen
et encore.
over and over
Et ne
and
rien faire
over
d'autre
again
qu'offrir
and do
nos condoléances
nothing other than offer our
faut que ça
condolences and our tears. This
que ça arrête
must stop.
maintenant.
This must stop now.
Nous le devons à cette
We
famille
owe
de
this
London. Nous le devons
to the family in
aux familles
London,
de la Grande
and we
Mosquée
owe
de
it to
Québec.
the
Nous
families
le devons
of the Grand Mosque
à toutes les
in Quebec
minorités
City. We owe this to
ethniques,
all
sexuelles,
minorities, be they
religieuses,
ethnic,
comme nous
sexual,
devons
or
aux
religious,
femmes et à nos frères et sœurs
just as
des
we
Premières
owe this
Nations.
to women and to our
Nous devons
brothers and
chercher
sisters
et trouver
of the First Nations.
des
We need
solutions
to
pour
look
que la
for and
violence,
find
cette violence
solutions
ciblée,
to put a
parce qu'on
stop
croit
to this
en
violence,
autre
this
chose.
targeted violence,
parce qu'on aime différemment,
because people believe
qu'on
in
a
different
la peau
things, because
d'une autre
people
couleur.
love differently, or because people
ça doit
have
cesser.
a different skin color. All of this
et
must
prenons
stop.
l'engagement de
Let's
travailler
undertake
à en finir
to
avec ça.
work toward ending
Mais
this.
l'heure n'est pas encore aux solutions.
But
L'heure est
now
à
is
la
not the
mémoire.
time to talk solutions.
Ce temps doit
Now is the
appartenir à Salman,
time
à Madia,
to commemorate.
et à la mère
This
de
time
Salman.
belongs to Salman,
temps
Madiha,
doit appartenir
Yumna, and
Fayez.
Salman's mother.
Petit garçon
This
soudainement
time
et
belongs to
horriblement
Fayez, the young
devenu
boy who
orphelin.
was suddenly and horribly made
Je
into an
ne peux
orphan.
imaginer
I
la
cannot
douleur qui
imagine
attend cet enfant.
this child's pain,
Il lui faudra
the pain
beaucoup
that
d'amour,
awaits him.
beaucoup.
He will need a lot of love, a lot of
Et c'est
love.
peut-être la seule bonne
And perhaps
réponse
that's the
à
only
donner
good
à la haine.
answer to hatred.
Nos premières pensées vont
So
à
our
Fayez.
first thoughts are with
Nous
Fayez.
souhaitons de tout cœur
We
qu'il se
sincerely
remette de
hope
ses blessures.
that he will recover
Et
from
qu'avec
his
le
injuries,
soutien
and with the
toute la
support
communauté,
of the entire community,
musulmane ou non,
Muslim or
se
not,
remette de ce triste événement.
we hope he will get
Ce
over
jeune
this
garçon
tragic
a
incident.
perdu sa famille,
This young boy has
Fauché.
lost his whole family,
arrachée
struck down
parce qu'elle est musulmane.
because they were
Y
Muslim.
a-t-il quelque chose de plus
Is there anything
fondamental
more fundamental
que la famille?
than
Y
family?
a-t-il quelque chose de plus
Is there anything
douloureux
more painful
que perdre sa famille?
than losing one's family?
Dimanche, une
On
promenade de
Sunday,
début de soirée en famille s'est terminée en
An
tragédie.
early evening
victime d'une
walkabout
haine
as a
insensée
family ended in
dégradante
tragedy.
à l'égard
They were
des
victims
musulmans.
of senseless hatred.
Dimanche soir,
toward
Un
Muslims.
événement qui n'est pas sans rappeler
On
la
Sunday
tragédie du
evening,
Québec, car une fois de plus,
this was an
brisé,
event
brisé.
that reminded us all of the tragedy in Quebec City.
Aux gens de la communauté
Once again,
musulmane,
lives were
aux amis
broken.
et aux proches,
To
de la
the
famille
people of
Salman,
the Muslim community, to
aux gens de
the
London
friends
et
and
de
loved ones
l'Ontario
of
en
the
entier,
Salman family, to
j'offre
the people
au
of
nom du
London
Bloc
and all
Québécois
Ontario,
les plus sincères
on behalf of the Bloc
condoléances.
Québécois, I offer
Nous
my
sommes de
most
tout cœur
sincere
avec
sympathies. We,
Monsieur le Président,
our thoughts are with you.
souhaitons à Fayez qu'il trouve
Mr. Speaker,
dans la
let's hope
communauté de
Fayez
London
finds
le
in the
réconfort
community
et la
of
force
London
pour passer
the
à
comfort
travers
and the strength
cette
to get
terrible
through
épreuve
this
et
terrible
souhaitons
ordeal.
qu'il trouve
And
dans
let's
sa
hope he
communauté
finds in
une
his
plus grande
community
famille.
a
Une
bigger
famille qui
family,
ne remplacera pas
a family that
celle
won't
qu'il a perdue
replace
cette
the one he
semaine,
lost
mais
this
une
week,
famille qui l'aimera.
but a family that will love
soutiendra.
him,
Il
support
sera
him,
toujours là
and
dans les
always
moments
be
les
there
plus difficiles,
in the toughest times,
mais aussi présente
but also
quand ce jeune homme
when
retrouvera
this young
le bonheur.
man finds happiness again.
Il faut en finir
We
avec la
need
haine. Il faut
to
en
get
finir
rid of
avec
hate.
l'islamophobie
We need to get
et toutes
rid
les
of
formes de
Islamophobia
racisme.
and all
Il faut en
forms of
finir
racism. We
avec la
need to get
violence.
rid of
Il
violence,
faut en finir avec
and we
les
need
tragédies.
to get rid of
On est
these
dû pour
tragedies.
que l'amour,
It is
la
time
fraternité
that love,
et la
fraternity, and family
reprennent leurs droits.
reclaimed their rightful
Merci, Mr.
place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Assalamu alaikum. Today is a hard day. To think about what this means to Muslims and their families across this country. We've heard people mention this, but it is so common. All of us have gone for walks with our family in this pandemic because there's nowhere else to go. There's places that are shut down. So you go for a walk. And to think that a family going for a walk couldn't make it home. To think that that casual walk around the block in our neighborhood would be one's last. To think that you can't walk safely down your own street. And to think about what that means for a Muslim family. Right now, people are talking to their families and saying, you know what, maybe you shouldn't go for a walk. There are people literally thinking about whether they should walk out their front door in our country. When we think about what that means, some people have said, this is not our Canada. And I think about what that means when people say, this is not our Canada. This happened in London, Ontario. I lived in London, Ontario for 5 years. I loved my time there. I think about the fact that my parents chose to make Canada our home. I love my home. I love this place. But the reality is, this is our Canada. This is our Canada. Our Canada is a place where 215 little kids were found dead in unmarked graves. Our Canada is a place where you can't walk down the streets if you wear a hijab because you will be killed. This is our Canada. We can't deny it. We can't reject that because it does no one any help. The reality is our Canada is a place of racism, of violence, of genocide of Indigenous people, and our Canada is a place where Muslims aren't safe. They aren't. They aren't safe. Muslims are not safe in this country. And Muslims wonder, I've spoken to people, they wonder, how many more lives will it take? How many more families will be mauled down the street? How many more families will be killed before we do something? Innocent people were killed while praying in a place of prayer, in a masjid, in a mosque in Quebec, gunned down. A man was a Muslim man in Toronto, was knifed and killed. And both of those incidents, we know very clearly that it was directly because of hate. It was because of hate. There was so much hate towards someone that they did not know just because of who they were, because of how they prayed, because of what they looked like. That is a reality. People live with that every day. They walk the streets wondering if I will be attacked just because of the way I look, not because of an enemy that I have, or not because of someone that's got a problem with me. Will I be attacked today just because of the way I look? That is a real question people ask. Wow. What a life to live, that you've got to wonder about that. And we think about people that left violence, they fled persecution, refugees, they come to this country thinking, I'm going to be safe here. This is a place of safety. And they're not safe. To Muslim Canadians, I'm so sorry that you have to live like this, that you have to live in fear. But there are things we can do. There are things we can do. When we think about the lives lost, we think about Salman, Madiha, Yumna, and young Fayez, who's still alive, and his grandmother. We think about those lives lost and Fayez still living. What can we do? What can we do now? Things have to change. We can't just do the same thing. We can't just continue as if nothing has happened. There have been so many lives lost, and people are frustrated. So what can we do? One, acknowledge that this is a reality that we have to deal with. This is Canada. This is a part of the country we live in. We've got to deal with it. We can't deny it. We can't ignore it. We have to confront it. This is a part of the country that we live in, and we've got to find a way to make things safer for people. We have to acknowledge that the real and urgent threat to Canadians' safety, these are Canadians, the real and urgent threat to Canadian safety is coming from hate, is coming from extreme right-wing ideology, it's coming from white supremacy, it's coming from hate groups that are expounding this type of hatred and radicalizing people. That is the real threat to Canadians' lives right now. So something's got to change. There's got to be resources placed to address the real and urgent threats to Canadians' lives. It is not coming from other places. It's coming from Canada, and it's coming from people radicalized to hate people who look different, who pray differently. That is the real threat that Canadians are facing. So then someone's got to listen to this and acknowledge that if that's the real threat, then resources have to be put towards addressing this real threat. We know, and this is a harsh reality, politicians have used Islamophobia for political gain. They have. They have used it as a divisive tool. That has to end. No one can ever use Islamophobia for a political gain. And we all know when it's been done. We all know how it's happened. And I'm not saying that it's solely those politicians who have used Islamophobia for political gain who are to blame. Absolutely not. But you are surely a part of the problem. If you have used Islamophobia for political gain, thinking I can divide people and get votes, this is the result of it. This is what happens when you divide people. You inflame hatred and people die. That's what happens. We need to tackle online hate. It is a real thing. Online hate is radicalizing people. Online hate is spreading messages that teach people to hate and create this fear of the other. We know that is happening, and we have to be serious about tackling it. Something has to change. It can't just continue. Another life can't be lost, and we do nothing about it. Another family can't be mauled down in the streets, and nothing happens. Ce que s'est passé, c'était un acte de violence, c'était un acte de terrorisme, c'était un acte de haine.
And terrorism
Et on doit faire
hate.
face à la haine
We need to
directement.
confront hatred head on.
C'est
What happened
insensible, c'est incompréhensible,
was
mais on doit agir.
senseless
C'est
and
maintenant le
it
moment
defies
de prendre
understanding,
une
but we
décision.
have to do
On va
something.
faire
We have
quelque
to
chose
act. We
pour
have to
mettre
make
fin
decisions. We
à
have
la
to
haine,
do
pour
something to
mettre
put an
fin à
end
ce sort de violence.
to hate and to
We
this
have
kind
to
of
make this a moment
violence.
where we decide to do something different as a country, where we come together and say we are going to put an end to hatred. We're going to put an end to violence. We're not going to allow political leaders to use this type of divisive hatred to gain political points. That has to end. That can't continue. We have to be serious about this. And to all the Muslim community right now in Canada that are suffering right now, that are feeling pain right now, I feel your pain. I understand your pain. And we are going to work towards making sure that you do not have to live in fear, that you do not have to walk the streets in fear. We are going to fight for you. Merci. Merci.
Thank you.
I believe the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands would like to seek unanimous consent to respond to this statement. All those opposed to the honourable member responding to this statement will please say nay. Agreed. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for putting my request forward, and thank you to all my colleagues for this opportunity to speak to this horrific event. Assalamu alaikum. I start with these words. Our hearts are broken. Our minds are numb. This could speak for all of Canada. These are the words of Omar Khamisa, who works as community outreach with the National Council of Canadian Muslims. To everyone in that council, to everyone who is a regular visitor to the Islamic Centre of Southwestern Ontario, where I've had the great honor to meet with imams, to speak of true Islamic spirit, to talk about the enormous contribution to Canada from our Muslim community. La communauté, les familles
The
musulmanes
community
sont
and
une partie
families
intégrale de notre
in the
pays.
Muslim community are an
Nous sommes
integral part
une
of our
famille
country.
partout
We
au
are
Canada.
one family
Et
all
c'est un
across
moment de
Canada,
grande tristesse.
and it's a moment
Sans
of
non
great
pareil.
sadness.
We say these words over and over as we experience, as my honourable colleagues, the Right Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, le chef de Bloc Québécois,
The leader
and
of the Bloc
the leader of the
Québécois.
New Democratic Party, who so movingly reminded us of all the ways in which our society is not the one we think we are. We've been holding a mirror up to ourselves for some time now, and it's hard to like what we see. When Cookpee, Roseanne Casimir, announces the preliminary findings of 215 long since died, but not that long ago, bodies of little children at the Kamloops Residential School. This event reminds us of how we stood together, and many of us here today in this chamber will remember standing in the bitter cold of Quebec City in 2017 with the Islamic community of Quebec City after the shootings in the Quebec City Mosque and saying never again. What strikes me now as we gather together again to repeat our frequent calls that we do better, I think of the honourable member for Mississauga, Erin Mills, and her motion 103. Now, I think of her courage because I know she was targeted with some very nasty messages after she stood up and said, we have to do something about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and hatreds of all kinds. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror and figure out what we do about it. One thing that Motion 103 did was, I think for many of us in this place who were serving when that was put forward, exposed us to Islamophobia. Because so many of my constituents, and many of them dear, sweet people, I know them, I wrote back to them and I said, oh, no, you misunderstand. Motion 103 won't elevate Islam above Christianity. They were afraid of that. They said, oh, no, Motion 103 doesn't mean we're going to have Sharia law in Canada. There's a level just below the surface, and it's fueled by, they'd send me the websites, by the way. They had news sources they wanted me to read that said, this is what Motion 103 will do. Yesterday, before the Ethics Committee, the Minister of Heritage, and I wish I'd taken notes, rattled off a bunch of statistics of how many hate crimes had been fueled, how many more, and we heard this referenced in speeches a moment ago. Police chiefs are reporting an increase in hatred online, an increase in incitement and radicalization to hate people based on their faith or the color of their skin. I'm at a loss. I don't think we should, as political leaders, and I'm former leader of the Green Party, of course, and our leader, Annamie Paul, has expressed the deep, deep sorrow of all of us, but all of us together as elected people, I think, have to actually stop for a while and listen. Maybe just invite people from the Islamic community, come talk to us. because there's something very, very wrong in a beautiful community like London. And I've had the honor to spend a lot of time there. And I do want to send my condolences to our former colleague in this place, because of course the Mayor of London used to be the MP for London West, to the current MP for London West, to the current MP for London Fanshawe, the current MP for London North Centre, all of the MPs touched by this personally. I know your hearts are broken and you don't understand how this could happen in your community. Neither do I. I just know that as Canadians, we have to do much, much better. And that starts with acknowledging that we are broken, that we allow people to be infested by a seething hatred that would look at a beautiful family out for a Sunday walk and with premeditation, according to the police, with premeditation, try to wipe out a whole family. To young Fayez, we'll never as a country be able to tell you how sorry we are, how much we hope for your future, how much we mourn the loss of the people of your family, the Afza family. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I don't think it helps us much as politicians to pretend we have answers. But I do agree with the Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party. If I ever again see a political party trying to divide us based on someone wearing a hijab, let's call that out. Let's make sure that we say to all of the Islamic community of this country, from the bottom of our hearts, we ask for your forgiveness, that we let this hatred live among us. We love you. We care for you, just as we do for all the members of this human family that is so very broken. Our hearts are broken. Our minds are numb. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.